The galaxy had never been closer to complete destruction. The Zarn, a ruthless alien race, had wiped out planet after planet. No one knew why they attacked. They didn't negotiate, they didn't ask for resources, and they certainly didn't show mercy. The Galactic Alliance, made up of dozens of advanced species, was running out of time and ideas. On the neutral moon of Eleron, leaders from across the galaxy gathered for one last desperate meeting. The chamber was filled with tall, imposing aliens, some with armored scales, others with shimmering fur, and a few that floated in tanks of liquid. Among them, the human ambassador, Mark Lanson, looked small and insignificant. Humans were still newcomers to the galactic stage, known more for their optimism than any real strength. The meeting was chaotic. The war generals of different species shouted over each other, each proposing grand military strikes to stop the Zarn. "We need to attack with full force," roared a four-armed Sarlacc general. "Their ships are powerful, but they are not invincible." "No," hissed a serpent-like alien. "If we engage them directly, we will only speed up our extinction. We must retreat to our strongest fortresses." Mark sat silently at the edge of the room, observing the arguing aliens. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even particularly brave. Back on Earth, people called him a coward because he always avoided confrontations. But as he listened to the heated debates, an idea began to form in his mind. Finally, when no one could agree on a plan, Mark stood up. "Let me try to talk to them," he said. The room fell silent for a moment before erupting in laughter. "Talk to the Zarn?" mocked a sharp-toothed alien. "They've destroyed entire civilizations without a word. What makes you think they'll listen to you?" Mark adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Because no one has ever tried. You've all been too focused on fighting them. What if they don't want war? What if there's another way to stop them?" "Another way?" growled the Sarlacc general. "We don't have time for your human fantasies, Lanson. You'll get yourself killed." But Mark didn't back down. "Give me one chance. Let me talk to them. If I fail, you can execute whatever plan you want. But if I succeed, we might avoid the destruction of every living being in this galaxy." Reluctantly, the leaders agreed. They didn't think he'd survive, but they had no better ideas. Mark was given a small, unarmed ship to approach the Zarn fleet. As he flew closer to the alien armada, his hands trembled. The Zarn ships were massive and intimidating, shaped like black daggers cutting through space. When he entered their communication range, he transmitted a simple message: "I wish to negotiate." At first, there was no response. Then, the Zarn fleet opened fire, not at him, but at a nearby asteroid, as if to warn him. Mark's heart pounded, but he repeated his message: "I wish to negotiate. I have an offer that could benefit both of us." After a long pause, the Zarn sent a single reply: "Speak." Mark knew this was his one chance. He didn't actually have anything to offer. He was bluffing. But he had studied the Zarn as much as he could, and one thing stood out: they were highly logical. They didn't waste time or resources unless they saw a clear benefit. Mark spoke calmly. "We humans have developed a weapon unlike anything you've seen before. It's not a ship or a bomb. It's something that can destroy entire fleets in seconds. I'm here to offer you a choice. Leave this galaxy in peace, or face a weapon that will end your existence." The Zarn's reply was cold and direct: "Prove it." Mark expected this. He had no weapon to show, but he didn't need one. He knew the Zarn valued efficiency, so he used their own logic against them. "If you think I'm lying, then why haven't you killed me yet?" he asked. "You're afraid of what humanity might be capable of. You're not sure, are you? And the fact that you hesitated proves my point." The Zarn didn't respond immediately. Mark felt sweat dripping down his back as he waited. He could almost feel their cold, alien minds analyzing his words, trying to decide if he was bluffing, or if humanity really had some mysterious superweapon. Finally, the Zarn sent their reply: "We will consider." The Zarn fleet stopped their attacks and withdrew to a safe distance. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough. Mark returned to the Galactic Alliance as a hero. His so-called cowardice had saved billions of lives. While the galaxy prepared for the possibility of future conflict, they now had time to rebuild and plan, thanks to Mark's quick thinking and bold bluff. Sometimes, courage isn't about being the strongest or the bravest. Sometimes, it's about stepping forward when no one else will and using your mind instead of your fists. Mark Lanson had proved that even a so-called coward could change the fate of the galaxy. The Crick swarm was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They were insect-like creatures, millions strong, moving from planet to planet, consuming everything in their path. Entire civilizations had been wiped out in weeks. The Galactic Alliance, an army of advanced alien species, had tried to stop them with force, but the Cricks were too many. Every battle ended in disaster. In the middle of this chaos was Captain Sarah Fields, a human officer in command of a small fleet of ships. Humans were new to the Alliance, and many of the other alien leaders didn't respect them. Sarah's reputation didn't help either. She was known as the Captain of Cowards because she always retreated from battles. While others stayed to fight and die, Sarah avoided direct conflict, focusing on saving her crew and gathering information about the enemy. "She's a coward," a Sarlacc general growled during an emergency meeting. "While we risk our lives, she runs away." "She's still alive, unlike most of your soldiers," replied Admiral Vec, an old alien leader who had seen Sarah's methods firsthand. "Her tactics might be what we need now." The Alliance was running out of options. Their fleets were destroyed, their planets under siege. The Cricks were closing in on Duralis Prime, the last remaining Alliance colony. If it fell, the galaxy would be lost. The Council reluctantly gave Sarah control of what remained of the fleet. Sarah's plan wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of preparing for a final battle, she ordered all forces to pull back. The alien generals protested loudly. "This is madness," shouted one. "The Cricks will destroy Duralis Prime if we don't stop them now." "We can't win a direct fight," Sarah said calmly. "But we can outthink them." Her fleet retreated into the shadows of a nearby asteroid field, where the Cricks wouldn't find them immediately. Using stealth and speed, Sarah began her strategy. Her plan wasn't to defeat the Cricks in battle, but to weaken them bit by bit. Over the next few days, Sarah's fleet became a ghost in the dark. Cricks' supply ships started disappearing. Their communication signals were hacked and scrambled, leaving their swarm disorganized. When a smaller group of Crick ships tried to scout the asteroid field, Sarah's fleet struck with precision, destroying them before they could report back. Then, as quickly as they appeared, they vanished again. The Cricks, for all their numbers, were not used to fighting enemies they couldn't see. They relied on overwhelming force, but Sarah refused to give them a target. Meanwhile, the other alien species began to see Sarah in a new light. Her so-called cowardice wasn't fear, it was strategy. By retreating from unwinnable battles, she had preserved resources and lives. Now, she was using those resources to turn the tide of the war. The Cricks grew frustrated. Their attacks on Duralis Prime became chaotic and uncoordinated. Sarah had her fleet spread false signals, tricking the Cricks into chasing phantom ships. At one point, a massive Cricks fleet followed a fake transmission into a dense nebula. Sarah had planted explosives inside the nebula, and as the Cricks entered, she detonated them, destroying thousands of their ships in one brilliant move. The alien generals who once mocked her began to trust her judgment. "Her mind is sharper than any blade," one of them admitted. But Sarah knew the war wasn't over yet. The Cricks queen, the heart of the swarm, was still alive. As long as she commanded her army, the Cricks would keep coming. Sarah devised one final plan, a risky operation to end the war once and for all. The Cricks Queen's flagship was a massive, living hive ship at the center of their fleet. Sarah studied its movements, looking for a weakness. She discovered that the Queen relied on a powerful communication hub to control her swarm. If that hub was destroyed, the Cricks would lose their coordination and turn into a mindless horde. Sarah's fleet launched a daring assault. While a small group of ships distracted the Cricks forces, Sarah led a stealth team deep into the hive ship. The corridors were dark and pulsating, filled with the sickly glow of alien biotechnology. Her team moved carefully, planting explosives near the communication hub. The Kricks detected them before they could escape. Alarms blared, and thousands of insect-like warriors swarmed towards Sarah's team. She ordered her crew to retreat while she stayed behind to ensure the mission's success. As the Kricks closed in, Sarah activated the explosives. The hive ship shook violently as the communication hub was destroyed. The Queen let out a deafening screech before the ship exploded, taking her and Sarah with it. Without the Queen, the Crick swarm collapsed. The remaining Crick ships drifted aimlessly, attacking each other or retreating into deep space. The galaxy was saved, but at a great cost. Sarah Fields was hailed as a hero. Statues were built in her honor on Juralis Prime, and her story was told across the galaxy. The species who once called her a coward now recognized her as a brilliant strategist and a brave leader. Her victory wasn't won through brute strength or reckless courage. It was won through patience, intelligence, and a willingness to make hard choices. Sarah had shown the galaxy that sometimes retreating isn't running away. It's a step toward victory. And in the end, her cowardice was what saved them all. The Galactic Gladiator Tournament was the most famous event in the universe. Every 5 years, species from across the galaxy sent their strongest warriors to compete in brutal battles. The winners earned glory, riches, and the respect of the galaxy. For centuries, humans had been too weak and too new to send anyone. But this time, Earth had decided to participate. When Milo stepped into the arena for the first time, the crowd erupted not in cheers, but in laughter. Milo didn't look like a gladiator. He was short, skinny, and wore simple glasses that kept slipping down his nose. The other competitors, towering alien warriors with razor-sharp claws, gleaming armor, and glowing weapons, stared at him in disbelief. "Is this some kind of joke?" snarled a 7-foot-tall alien covered in spikes. "Humans must have a death wish." The audience roared with amusement, and the announcer, a multi-limbed alien named Vrax, smirked as he introduced Milo. Representing Earth. Milo, the Terran scholar. The crowd booed and jeered, already certain of his defeat. Milo, however, didn't flinch. He wasn't here to fight with weapons or brute strength. He was here to use the one thing humans excelled at, their minds. The first round of the tournament was a traditional combat challenge. Milo was paired against an 8-legged alien that resembled a giant scorpion. As the match began, the scorpion charged at him, its claws snapping and its venomous stinger aimed at his heart. Milo dodged clumsily, barely avoiding the attack. The crowd laughed and shouted insults, but Milo wasn't paying attention. He noticed something interesting. The scorpion moved predictably, always using its left claw first. Milo started running in circles, forcing the scorpion to chase him. It wasn't long before the creature grew tired, its movements slowing. That's when Milo struck. He threw a handful of sand into its sensitive eyes and used a lever on the arena floor to drop the scorpion into a pit. The audience was stunned. Milo had won his first match without landing a single physical blow. As the tournament continued, Milo faced increasingly dangerous opponents. There was a towering brute from the Grask species whose skin was impervious to weapons. Milo tricked him into stepping on a hidden pressure plate, activating a trap that knocked the alien out cold. Another opponent, a telepathic alien, tried to invade Milo's mind, but Milo used a clever device to reflect the telepath's own powers back at him. With each victory, Milo's confidence grew. But so did the hatred of his opponents. They whispered behind his back, calling him a coward and a cheat. "He's not a warrior," one alien sneered. "He's just lucky." But the audience began to change their minds. They realized that Milo wasn't lucky, he was smart. Every move he made was carefully planned, every victory earned through strategy and observation. The nickname the Game Changer began to spread through the crowd. The final match of the tournament was the most anticipated event. Milo's opponent was Korak, a legendary gladiator from the Zarn species. Korak was over 10 feet tall, with glowing red eyes and arms thick as tree trunks. He had won 3 tournaments in a row and was famous for his brutal fighting style. Milo stood across from Korak in the arena, looking calm but determined. Korak sneered down at him. "You don't belong here, human," he growled. You should have stayed in your libraries. As the match began, Korak charged at Milo with a massive warhammer. Milo barely dodged the first swing, the ground shaking as the hammer struck the floor. He knew he couldn't survive a direct hit, so he stayed on the move, studying Korak's patterns. Unlike the other opponents, Korak was smarter. He didn't fall for traps easily, and he adapted quickly. Milo realized he needed to do something drastic. He spotted a stack of power generators in the corner of the arena. If he could overload them, they might create a blast strong enough to disable Korak. But the problem was getting close without being crushed. Milo picked up a broken piece of metal and hurled it at Korak's face. The alien roared in anger and charged again. This time, Milo ran toward the generators, leading Korak straight into the trap. As Korak raised his hammer for a final blow, Milo ducked and smashed a panel on the generator. Sparks flew, and the machine began to hum dangerously. Milo dove out of the way just as the generators exploded, sending a shockwave through the arena. When the dust settled, Korak was lying on the ground, unconscious. Milo, though battered and bruised, stood victorious. The crowd erupted in cheers. The same people who had laughed at Milo at the start of the tournament were now chanting his name. Milo! Milo! The game changer. Korak regained consciousness and stared at Milo in disbelief. "You're not a warrior," he said grudgingly, "but you're something better. You're a survivor." Milo smiled. Sometimes it's not about strength. It's about thinking ahead. Milo was crowned the champion of the Galactic Gladiator Tournament, the first human to ever win. His victory wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a message to the galaxy. Humans, once dismissed as weak and cowardly, had shown that strength wasn't just about muscles or weapons. Sometimes, the smartest person in the room could be the most dangerous of all. And as Milo stood on the podium, holding the golden trophy high above his head, he knew one thing for certain: he had changed the game forever. The occupation of Sirion V was absolute. The Creel Dominion, a tyrannical empire known for its cruelty, had conquered the once prosperous colony in a matter of days. The planet's leaders were executed publicly, its cities turned into military outposts, and its people forced into slavery. Resistance was crushed swiftly, and those who survived the initial rebellions were either imprisoned or too terrified to rise again. Deep in the shadowy alleys of the capital city, a young man named Ethan lived in hiding. Ethan was no hero. He wasn't a soldier or a freedom fighter. He was a mechanic, an ordinary human trying to stay out of the Krull's way. Known among the locals as a coward, Ethan had spent months avoiding any confrontation, watching silently as the Creel tightened their grip on Sirion V. His survival strategy was simple: stay unnoticed. When the Creel came, he hid. When they demanded supplies, he handed them over without protest. He wasn't proud of it, but he convinced himself it was the only way to stay alive. One evening, while scavenging for spare parts in an abandoned warehouse, Ethan overheard a whispered conversation. A group of rebels, ragged and desperate, was huddled together, discussing plans to sabotage the Krell's main communication hub. Ethan recognized a few of them from his old neighborhood people who had been fearless before the occupation. "You're wasting your time," Ethan muttered, stepping out of the shadows. The rebels turned toward him, startled. One of them, a woman named Lyra, narrowed her eyes. "Ethan," she said with disdain, "the coward of Sirion. What are you doing here?" "Looking for a safe place to hide?" Ethan shrugged. "I'm just trying to survive. And you should too. If the Creel catch you, they'll kill you." "We'd rather die fighting than live as slaves," Lyra shot back. Her words stung, but Ethan didn't respond. He left the warehouse, but their conversations stayed with him. As much as he wanted to ignore it, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was letting everyone down. The next day, Ethan stumbled upon something unexpected: a discarded Krill datapad. It was damaged, but still functional. Using his skills as a mechanic, Ethan repaired it and discovered it contained valuable information security codes, troop movements, and even plans for an upcoming Krill operation. Ethan knew he should turn it over to the rebels, but he hesitated. If he got involved, he'd be putting himself in danger. He thought about destroying the datapad and walking away. But then he thought about the people of Sirion 5, beaten down and hopeless. Maybe he wasn't a soldier, but this datapad was something he could use. That night, Ethan returned to the warehouse and handed the datapad to Lyra. "Here," he said, avoiding her gaze. "This might help." Lyra stared at him in disbelief. "Why are you doing this?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "Maybe I'm tired of hiding." With the datapad, the rebels were able to plan a successful raid on a krill supply depot. It was a small victory, but it sparked a glimmer of hope among the people of Sirion 5. Word of the raid spread, and more civilians began to join the resistance. Ethan continued to help from the sidelines, using his technical skills to hack into krill systems and disable their equipment. He still avoided direct combat. Slowly, the rebels began to see him in a new light. The turning point came when the krill announced their next move, a mass execution of captured rebels to crush any remaining defiance. The executions were to be broadcast across the planet as a warning. Ethan knew this was his moment to make a difference. "Are you crazy?" Lyra asked when Ethan proposed his plan. "You're talking about breaking into the Krell's central command station. That's suicide." "I'm not going to fight them," Ethan said. "I'm going to outsmart them." On the day of the executions, the Krell gathered their prisoners in the city square. Their commander, a towering alien with cold silver eyes, prepared to deliver a speech. The crowd watched in silence, their faces filled with fear. But just as the executioner raised his weapon, a moment later, the Krell commander's voice was replaced by a transmission from the rebels. Ethan had hacked into the broadcast system, using the codes he'd stolen from the datapad. The transmission showed images of the Krell's atrocities, burned villages, enslaved families, and the executions of innocent civilians. Ethan's voice echoed across the city. "This is what the Krell have done to us. They want us to live in fear. But today, we fight back. Rise up, Sirion 5. You are not alone." At the same time, Ethan activated a series of explosions he had rigged around the Krell's command station. The blasts sent the Krell forces into chaos, giving the rebels the distraction they needed to storm the city square and free the prisoners. The uprising spread like wildfire. Civilians armed themselves with whatever they could find, overwhelming the Krell soldiers with sheer numbers. Ethan, who had always stayed in the background, found himself leading the charge. He wasn't the bravest fighter, but his clever traps and quick thinking turned the tide of battle. By the end of the day, the Krell forces on Sirion 5 were defeated. The people of the planet, once broken and hopeless, stood united. Ethan didn't see himself as a hero. He had spent most of his life avoiding conflict, and even during the revolution, he relied on his wits rather than his courage. But to the people of Sirion 5, he was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even the most unlikely person could spark a revolution. As the rebels celebrated their victory, Lyra approached Ethan. "You might not be a soldier," she said, "but you've shown us something even more important. Sometimes, the smartest weapon we have is our mind." Ethan nodded, looking out at the liberated city. For the first time in his life, he felt like he had made a difference. The coward had become the game changer, and Sirion 5 was free.